class on the Crucible. So we're all ticking along, getting loads of work done, and hopefully we get loads of work done this evening as well. So the reason I have the lovely Kira on, it's gas watching my brilliant colleagues teach who actually teach difficult subjects teach on screen there. The reason I have the platform open is because, again, just to remind you that, I know there are people on the call now who are, members who have been with me all year, and I hope you guys are well. And other guys who are maybe not members of Grind 360 and are just taking advantage of the free um, junior cycle, or sorry, leaving cert classes over Easter. And again, I would ask you to remember that we're providing these for free in the hope that you might make a little donation to the Join Our Boys charity or foundation. So just to show you where the notes are, and I see there's already a question there, James, and I'll come to that. So the notes, you go into download notes, and you'll see English is there somewhere. It's probably at the top, is it? Yeah, silly me. And this is why I get in trouble with my colleagues, because for loads of other subjects, there's only one or two documents, because my colleagues are all very efficient and they collate the documents into one document. But with me, I'm not as efficient as them. But you'll see the Patrick Kavanagh poems and summaries there. You'll see the Patrick Kavanagh mind map document there, and you'll see the Patrick Kavanagh essay number 2 there. Those are the 3 documents that I'll be looking at today. There's actually a 4th document that I didn't load up because it's only like one double-sided page. I'm going to be looking at it towards the end of today's class. But if you want me to put that up as well, I can. But those were the 3 documents are in the downloadable notes: Patrick Kavanagh mind map, Patrick Kavanagh poems and summaries, Patrick Kavanagh essay, and it says number 2 there because obviously there was a number 1, which I don't use anymore because the question is out of date. So that's what we're looking at, and we're going to get straight in now, and we're going to look at we won't actually start with the mind map. We're going to go and look at the notes on his poems, and we're going to break down a couple of his poems really quickly in a relaxed way. Now, James is saying he can't make Thursday. Sorry about that, James, and very little I can do about that. But you do know that all the Easter courses are recorded. I've already done quite a lot of work on Boland. Don't forget, when you go into our platform, I've got, I think I've got recordings on, is it 8 Boland poems up on the platform? Certainly between the YouTube channel and the Grind 360 platform, there's 8 poems analysed. There's a mind map done. I covered her in the weekly classes earlier on in the year quite thoroughly, and I also covered Boland in a workshop. I think that was that in February, or could have been Halloween. Anyway, all that stuff, whatever's there will be on the platform. And yeah, Thursday, if you can't attend live on Thursday, as far as I'm aware, and I know there are people working in the background here, info we call you, you might let the guys know. And there we are, admin. The notes for this class are available under down. Yeah, it's got that. Desktop, you can use this. Yeah, they're helping with the notes. Now, can I access the notes you're using in today's class if you don't have membership? Yes, that's the answer. Because again, I'll just go back and show you where we were. So there is home, and you see in the top left hand corner where it says free app users. So that's all you have to do. Click on that. You see English here. Click on that. And as I said, there's Kavanagh. And you just click on those and you can download them. Okay? Hope that's okay. Thanks, James. Okay, so let's get going. Now, first thing to talk about, Kavanagh is one of 3 Irish poets prescribed for study this year. Okay? Now, there has never been an exam. Christina, that's not a question I'm going to get into now again. Guys, can I just make it clear? This is a workshop on Patrick Kavanagh. I've been doing this work all year, and I will be doing it again on Thursday, talking about different poets. I'm not here to tell you who's coming up. This is a workshop on Patrick Kavanagh. Okay? So we can park some of those questions if you want to ask them in the class on Thursday. But again, I've already dealt with that. I've dealt with those questions on TikTok videos. I've dealt with them in the live classes, in the weekly grinds. So we're not going down that rabbit hole now, okay? What we know about Kavanagh is he's one of 3 Irish poets prescribed for study. What we know is that the 3 Irish poets prescribed for study are, in 2025, are Boland, Kavanagh and Mahon. And what we know is that Boland and Kavanagh sorry, Kavanagh and Mahon were both examined as recently as 2023. Okay? And that Boland, the last time Boland was examined, I think was 2021. So just in terms of recency bias, it is less likely that Kavanagh and Boland will be on the paper and more likely that Boland will be. However, it is my expectation, and again, I'm not getting into predictions, it is my expectation that because there are 5 poets prescribed for study, my expectation is that there will be 2 Irish poets, 3 female poets, 2 Irish poets, 3 female poets, and 1 of the dogs. Now, you might think to yourself, well, hold on, Paul, is that not 6? But if Boland is on, she is one of the, she's Irish and female, so she ticks both categories. Then perhaps Kavanagh or Mahon, it's a toss of a coin. Anybody who tells you who's coming up doesn't know. Then maybe you might get Tracy K. Smith. So that's Boland and Smith. And you might get, I don't know, Dickinson as well, or Platt. Who cares? I'm not covering Platt this year, but I have covered Dickinson in class. And then you're going to get, well, I'd be surprised if you don't get one of Hopkins or Elliot. Let's say Hopkins. Now, for me, that would be, if we got those 5 poets, I wouldn't be surprised at all. Boland, Kavanagh, Smith, Dickinson, and Hopkins. Now, if you twist that around, you might not get Boland. So you might get Mahon and Kavanagh and Smith, and you might not get Dickinson, you might get Platt, and you might not get Hopkins, you might get Elliot, but still, you're still going to have choices. Many of you are going to cut corners. You're going to try to get through by doing 1, 2, or 3 poets. Again, that's not advisable. I'm teaching Kavanagh here, but I'm not getting into this. That's not advisable. What you want to do is make sure you have 4 poets well covered, because if you have 4 poets covered, that means that you're guaranteed that at least one of those 5 poets that comes up in the exam will be a poet that you've prepared. And remember, we're going to look at this in short order. The last time Kavanagh came up, a lot of people struggled with the question on him. So if he comes up this year, there's no guarantee. If Boland comes up this year, the big hot favourite. If Smith comes up this year, who's a lot of people seem to be really liking Smith's poetry, you have to also be prepared for the question. So the idea of today's class is, in the first kind of hour of today's class, I'm just going to look at a couple of the poems, just to remind you of the key features of his poetry. I'm going to go through the mind map and tell you what I think is important in terms of his thematic concerns and the aspects of style. We're going to then go and look at some questions on Kavanagh from past exams, and also questions from mock exams, and questions that I have created that I think match the type of questions that come up in the Leaving Cert. And we're going to look at some sample answers. That's the purpose. And hopefully by the time today's class is over, you'll have a better understanding. You'll have revised him. Now, by the way, just something to mention again before I get into the nuts and bolts of this. There are only 2 poems by Kavanagh that I haven't covered in video content. And those 2 poems are The Great Hunger and Epic. Now, that means that I have 8 other poets covered by Kavanagh. I'll try and remember what they all are. So Christmas Childhood, Inishkeen Road, July Evening, On Raglan Road, Lines Written, Canal Bank Walk, The Hospital, what am I missing there? Shanko Duff. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There is an 8th one as well. I can't remember what it is. So I have him thoroughly covered. So I don't want them saying, Paul, can you do The Great Hunger? Can you do Epic? No. So if you've done The Great Hunger and you don't understand it in class, you don't understand what your teacher was going about, just don't study it. Go and look at one of the other poems and substitute one of those in instead. There's no guarantee that you don't have to do any individual poem. You should have a selection of 4 to 5 of the Kavanagh poems ready. And if you have 4 to 5 of the Kavanagh poems ready, you're going to be able to, you'll have the material that you need to answer whatever questions come up, whatever question comes up, if he comes up, and you will have, you will be then down to your skills, your ability to interpret the question, and your ability to write an essay which is question facing and evidence based. So that's what we're looking at. Is that the one I'm missing? Advent. How could I forget Advent? It's my favourite Kavanagh poem. I have no idea why iPhone 2. So there are 38 poems. So as I said, on the YouTube channel and on our platform, you've coverage, my analysis of all of those poems. And my analysis of most of those poems is also inside these notes. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to look at one of his. I always think of Kavanagh. When I'm looking at his poetry, there's the there's a distinct difference between poems that were written early in his life and poems that were written later. And so when I think about the poems that were written early in his life, I'm thinking about A Christmas Childhood. I'm thinking about Inishkeen Road, July Evening. And I'm thinking about, it's not quite early, but I'm thinking about Shanko Duff. I'm thinking about Advent. And then when I think about the poems that are later poems, I'm thinking about lines written, Canal Bank Walk, The Hospital. They're known as the Canal Sonnets, and On Raglan Road as well. Now, the reason I thought I like to think about those poems, the YouTube, I'll show it to you now in a second. It is, sorry now, guys. I don't want this to be messy tonight. I've got loads of work to do. So the YouTube is PMC Brunner English. And there's tons. I mean, there you go. We did a class on Tracy K. Smith on Thursday night, and I didn't, because it was such a really was a like, I don't know if you were on the class or you agree. I really enjoyed that. It was a brilliant class. And when I get really into something and I get loads of questions from students that relate about the work, I'm always falling behind. And I got the universe as a house party done, and I didn't get letter to a photojournalist going in. And again, those two poems bring my Tracy K. Smith material up, I think, to 8 or 9 poems are covered by her as well between the platform. Well, they're all on the platform, but also the stuff on YouTube. And then when I look back at the class and the universe's house party, I was interrupting my analysis of that poem quite a lot by questions. So I sat down the next day and I recorded them as well. I recorded the analysis of that poem again, kind of in a more structured way. So you might find those useful. But that's the YouTube channel, okay? Now, so the reason I've broken up the poems into the red and green is simply because there's the unhappy Kavanagh. Now on Raglan Road is the unhappy Kavanagh, but he is an older man in it. But there's the unhappy Kavanagh, and then there's the spiritually content Kavanagh. And I think that it is really important. If it was me, I'd be looking at a couple of the poems that show his unease, his unhappiness. And I'd be looking at a couple of the poems that show him later in life having found spiritual contentment. So when I'm picking the 4 or 5 poems I do, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for poems that are reflective of his mood and his spiritual state. He's very troubled at times in his poetry, and then other times he's very content. And you're looking for poems which reflect those different aspects of his life. So we're going to start, and I'm going to start with a really easy poem, which I love teaching, and I think it sums up his work, and it's called Inishkeen Road, July Evening. I'm just going to have a quick look at it. Before I do, by the way, just to say, there's a little breakdown there, and I'm not going to read this now because it's done again in the mind map. A little breakdown there of what I think are the important thematic concerns and the important aspects of style that you find in Kavanagh's poetry. I think that might be worth looking at if you have the time at some stage. So let's have a look at this poem just to talk about the mastery of language that you see in Kavanagh's poetry. So I won't dwell on this because, again, I've already broken this poem down before in video content, but I just want to talk to you about why a poem like this would be a great poem to prepare for the Leaving Cert. There is nothing surer that when Kavanagh comes up, if he comes up, or whatever poet you're answering on in the Leaving Cert, that the question that they ask is going to ask you to discuss the relationship between the thematic content and the style of writing evident in the poet's work. So every time you prepare a poem, every time you look at a Kavanagh poem, every time you look at a Tracy K. Smith poem, a Boland poem, a Mahon poem, think about, okay, fundamentally, what's this poem about? And what are the standout examples of language in the poem? Might be imagery, might be something to do with the rhythm, it might be something to do with a rhetorical technique that is employed in a poem. There's loads of different things you can say about language, but you're always looking for, okay, fundamentally, in 2 sentences, what's this poem about? And then in 3 quotes, give me 3 different aspects of style. That's how you prepare a poem. That's how you kind of nail down the poem. That'll give you enough to discuss a poem in an essay. Don't forget, if you're going to go poem by poem, which most of you will, and we're going to discuss, poetry essay writing later on today. If you're going to go poem by poem, you're going to write somewhere between 150 and 200 words per poem. If you write about 200 words per poem, that's great. It's going to get you up close to 1,000 words, which are opening or closing if you do 4 poems. If you write 200 words per poem and you do 5 poems, well, you've got really good length poetry essay. If you write 150 words per poem and you write about 5 poems, you haven't written about any poem at great length, but you've covered 5 poems, and hopefully your work is question facing and you're going to score. So let's have a quick look at this poem, and we're going to talk really quickly about the content thematically and the content stylistically. So we have a really, really lovely rhythm in the poem. So have a listen. I'm going to sound a bit stupid now. The bicycles go by in 2s and 3s. There's a dance in Billy Brennan's barn tonight. And there's the half-talk code of mysteries. And the wink and elbow language of delight. Now, what do you see? The poem is written in a particular meter. In this particular case, it's iambic pentameter. You do not need to know that, although it's nice if you do. While a lot of poets on your course do not write within metrical form, Kavanagh does. So he's very much a stylist. He wants his poetry to be rhythmic. And there is no doubt that his poetry has a musical quality, a fluency that is brought about through his use of rhyming and meter. Is that something that you're going to write about in the question? Depends on the question, depends on your approach to the question. When we look here, we see that this is very much an example of lyric poetry. Kavanagh is writing about his own life and experiences. Lyric refers to, it's like personal writing. Lyric poetry is poetry which explores the poet's life experiences. It's deeply personal. And as you know, all good personal writing, and we'll discuss this in Monday's class, Jesus Christ, we're doing a lot of, so Tracy gets me 2 hours this morning, 2.5 hours today, another 2 hours, that's 6.5 hours, 3 hours of paper 1 on Monday. I think that's only for members, I think that's free. That's 9.5 hours, and then 4 hours of paper 2 on Thursday, and probably more than that, because that class always goes long, that paper 2 class. So we're going to be up to 14.5 hours of tuition over the course of Easter. So we'll have loads done. But personal writing has to be reflective. And there is no doubt that Kavanagh's poetry is deeply reflective. And when we read the poems, we get a sense of him, the man he is, the life experiences he has. And he's very vulnerable and has a confessional approach when talking about his own life and experiences. Sorry. And that's what lies at the core of this poem. It's really famous because of that, alliterative opening. The bicycles, comes with the B, go by in 2s and 3s. There's a dance in Billy Brennan's barn tonight. So that's really famous. There's this image of him standing on the road and he's looking out and he sees these, groups of people heading off towards this dance, and the reference to Billy Brennan's barn kind of situates the poem. It gives you a sense of place, a sense of setting, and setting is, of course, a very important aspect of Kavanagh's poetry. We're going to look at a question that specifically asked about his use of setting later on in today's class. But what's really interesting here, and if I was going to be learning quotes from this part of this poem, he says, and there's the half-talk code of mysteries. Sorry, no. The wink and elbow language of delight. Now, you see that phrase there, half-talk code. And you see that phrase there, wink and elbow language of delight, but particularly half-talk code and wink and elbow. See the way those words are created by using the hyphen to connect existing words to create a new phrase. That's typical of Kavanagh's poetry. Those are called compound words, or compound adjectives. And his use of compound words or compound adjectives is evidence of his creativity and imagination as a writer. So when he says half talk, he's talking about how when he sees socially, he's a very socially awkward person. And when he sees his peers interacting, he feels as if he doesn't really understand what they're saying. He doesn't understand how they communicate. He gets the words, but not what the words mean and how the words are put together. And that's what he means when he says again, wink and elbow language of delight. Wink and elbow means communication through nuances other than language. And he understands that when he sees his peers interacting, having the crack, having fun, he sees joy and happiness, but it's a mystery to him. He's on the outside. So he feels isolated and alone in this world. And that's why he creates this scenario of him standing on in a dark country lane, watching his peers from the locality heading off to a party while he's left alone. The whole scenario is symbolic. It represents his experience of life. He feels isolated, left out, unable to make contact with or to communicate or to understand his peers. And he communicates that very honest insight into his own life in highly creative, imaginative language. So if I was preparing this poem, I would certainly learn the half-talk code of mysteries and the wink and elbow language of delight. He goes on in the second half of the octave. This poem is a sonnet. You know, it's an 8-line sequence followed by a 6-line sequence, and he just captures the atmosphere of this evening where everybody's having woo, 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 woo at the party. It's probably not quite that kind of music. It might be more diddly eye, but everybody's in there while he's outside alone. 8:30, and there's not a spot upon a mile of road, no shadow thrown that might turn out a man or woman, nor a footfall tapping secrecies of stone. So beautiful use of onomatopoeia there, beautiful use of sibilants being used to and alliteration in that line. A very notable line, a line that's typical of his very meticulous control over language. The meter in the line, the combination of alliteration, of sibilants, and then the onomatopoeia of tapping, really capturing the atmosphere of that moment. But it's not a line I would learn from the poem, because I'm skeptical about the fact that you would ever use that line when analysing the poem, and because I think there are better lines to think about in the second half of the poem. And if I was preparing this poem, I would certainly learn this line here, and I would certainly learn this literary allusion or historical allusion. And that, if I'm preparing the poem, those are the 3 quotes that I have ready. Maybe I might learn the first sequence as well. You know, especially there's a dance in Billy Brennan's barn tonight because of the alliteration. But what you want to do is look at those 2 lines and look at the reflective nature of those lines and think about what he's talking about in those lines. So look at how honest he is. I have what every poet hates. So he identifies himself as a poet, and he hates something about being a poet, and he understands that people often lie. They don't tell the truth about their situation. So poets like to talk about how important it is to be alone so they can contemplate and think and come up with ideas. Lucy, my thing is always 3. Some poems will be more, longer poems often there's more. But if you have 3 good quotes from each poem, because I mean, like if you're going to prepare properly, you're going to prepare 5 poems by at least 4 poets. Like that's 20 poems. Multiply that by 3, that's 60 quotes. So I think 3 per poem is probably loads. If you have 1 or 2 more, it's better. Well, we'll talk about how to learn quotation maybe in later on in today's class. But you know, look at the honesty there. He's saying, I hate being alone. So he's saying poets often say, artists often say, well, in order to, you know, pursue my muse and in order to, you know, to pursue my vocation in my art, I need to be alone. But actually what he's saying is, I hate being alone. And he says it in very direct language. I have what every poet hates in spite of all the solemn talk of contemplation. And then he says, oh, Alexander Selkirk knew the plight of being king and government and nation, I rode a mile of kingdom. I am king of banks and stones and every blooming thing. And the only thing you need to learn from that last sequence is that reference there. And that is what we call a historical or literary allusion. Now, allusions enrich writing. Boland does it all the time in her poetry, especially when she's referring to her knowledge of Greek and Roman mythology. Allusions are, Tracy K. Smith does it as well. The very good example of that is the poem The Searchers, which contains an allusion to a famous movie. She doesn't explain anything about the movie, but you have to understand the movie in order to understand what she's talking about in the opening sequence of the poem. So an allusion is a reference to knowledge that the writer has that of culture, of history, of literature, of politics, whatever, art. But they don't explain that allusion. And in order for you to understand the reference, you have to go and find out what they're alluding to or referring to. Now, Alexander Selkirk, you might not have heard of him, but Alexander Selkirk was a real life figure who became the inspiration for the fictional character of Robinson Crusoe. I think that's how you spell Robinson Crusoe. I'm actually going to check that now. Yeah, it's not, there's only one E. Didn't look right when I wrote it. Didn't the notes anyway. And I'm sure you know who Robinson Crusoe is. He is that fictional character created by Daniel Defoe who was shipwrecked and had to live on an island on his own to survive. The inspiration for the famous Tom Hanks movie Castaway. Alexander Selkirk was a real man, a Scottish sailor who was, the story went anyway, isolated on an island for a number of months when he was, when his ship was there was a mutiny on board his ship. But if you're on an island on your own, you are, by the very definition, you are utterly cut off from the rest of humanity. You are lonely and you are isolated. And what Kavanagh is saying in this poem is, I am lonely and I am isolated. I am the king. See the way he says here? There's an ego in Kavanagh's poetry. I'm going to show you another example of that in a minute. I am the king. I am a poet. I'm a brilliant writer. But I live in a place where I have nobody to talk to about this. Nobody here is interested in what I'm interested in. What is the point of being a brilliant hurler in a country where nobody plays hurling? What is the point in being excellent at something that has no value in the society? What is the effect of being fascinated by something that your peers think is trivial and unimportant? The effect of all those things is deep frustration, deep unhappiness, and a sense of isolation. So when we read this poem, we meet the, lyrical, and I'm using that word deliberately. Some of you will know why I'm referring to that word lyrical about his poetry. We meet the confessional, the personal, the thoughtful, the frustrated, the disappointed with life, but hugely creative, controlled, imaginative writer, Patrick Kavanagh. This is a man who is deeply, deeply unhappy. And what we find then is later in his life, he found a route to happiness. He found a way to feel and experience spiritual contentment. So when we're reading his poetry really takes us on a journey through his life, and it is autobiographical, honest and reflective and interesting because of that. Yeah, of course. Okay, so there's a good question there. Would you talk about the Robinson reference and expand about loneliness and isolation? Yes. Now I'm gonna just take that question and take the question from C and move to look at some questions on Kavanagh from past exams or questions that I have created on him. So I'm going to go in the same document where the poems are. I'm going to go to the back and I'm going to show you some questions, okay? So here's a question. And I might do a bit of improv in this class today, if you'd like me to. Here's a question that was asked in 2022 on the poet William Wordsworth. I actually loved this question. And what I've done is I've taken Wordsworth's name out and I've replaced it with Kavanagh. And I wonder, now, so this was on the actual Leaving Cert, I wonder how you would cope with it. Patrick Kavanagh's poetry does not have current appeal because his poetic style and use of language are dated and his themes are irrelevant in the 21st century. So, remember I said that love heart? That relationship, I don't know what that's meant to be there. I'll try that again. Come on, Paul. That relationship between themes and language. Well, have a look there, right? So if this is language, we have dated style and use of language. And then if this is themes, we have themes which are irrelevant in the 21st century. So you think about the poem that we've just read. So page 20 in the main document. And of course, Nat. So this is crucial here. And one of the frightening things for me as a teacher of English for the last nearly 3 decades is how unbelievably narrow responses can be and unbelievably narrow the teaching that goes on can be. Look at the question that Nat just asked. Can you disagree with that? No, obviously, because he's going, that sounds weird. You wouldn't say that about Kavanagh. Nat's going, well, why would they put a poet on the Leaving Cert to study if they were shit? Because that question is essentially saying, this poet is shit. Do you agree? Of course, that question was framed in such a way to promote a contrary response. The question was asked about William Wordsworth. Like, somebody who's never read poetry will have heard of William Wordsworth. William Wordsworth is regarded as one of the greatest writers who's ever lived in any language, never mind the English language. So to say that his work doesn't have current appeal, to say that his themes are dated or irrelevant and his language is dated, is simply wrong. So of course you're going to disagree with that statement. Now that was very, very, very rare. Do you get a statement as deliberately contrarian as that one? But there it was in 2022. Now what I'm saying to you is, if you were, so C asked the question, if you were answering that question and you talked about Inishkeen Road July Evening, well, in that poem he's writing about feeling isolated from society. He's writing about feeling different. He's writing about the difficulty of loneliness. That is as relevant in 2025 as it was when he wrote the poem in the 1930s. It is going to be relevant if humanity manages to survive into the next 1,000 or 10,000 years. There will always be that feeling of being an outsider and being different. And especially if you are interested in things that your peers are not interested in. There will always be that sense of, people who feel that they just don't fit in. So that is utterly relevant. And when it comes to Kavanagh, the language is far from dated. In fact, it's creative and imaginative and rhythmic and fluent and all those things that make it memorable. I was going to say Leafy Love Banks, but that's an example we're going to look at later on. But as I said a moment ago, when we looked at Inishkeen Road July Evening, when he talked about the half-talk code of mysteries, the wink and elbow language of the light, the creativity there, the use of compound adjectives to create new words, to communicate kind of complex ideas in easily accessible manner. And yes, the use of the literary and historical allusion to Alexander Selkirk and the richness that adds to the poem and the use of symbolism there which allows him to communicate his sense of isolation, but also his sense that he has a talent that he's wasting because he's in the wrong place. He feels like he's surrounded by the wrong types of people. And the use of that symbol, that literary allusion, communicates that so well. So this is where, like, I when I do these when I do these crash courses, especially when they're open, and I'm delighted, by the way, they're open. I want as many of you as possible to somehow, hopefully, benefit a little bit from attending my classes. But one of the places I get frustrated is because, you know, that thing where you're shouting in an empty room and nobody can hear you. For my whole career, I've been saying to students, yeah, you need to know the poems. But if you think the end of the work is knowing the poems, then that's where you're going wrong. You have to think about how you would use the knowledge to answer different types of questions. So people are going, will Kavanagh come up? Will Kavanagh come up? Will Kavanagh come up? Well, if he did come up and that question come up, how would you have coped with it? And the only way you can prepare for that is by looking at past questions and practice writing paragraphs. I'll show you another example. Here is a question from a mock exam. Sarah, as far as I'm aware, it will be. Are you telling me you'd like to watch it twice? Or are you telling me I have to go, Paul? That's okay. It's actually not raining now, so maybe you do. Maybe you're stuck indoors all day. Yeah, as far as I'm aware, guys. And Roisin, there you have it. Now, Roisin, this is what we call creative, imaginative, engaging thinking. Roisin says, is that Roisin I know? Can you both agree and disagree in your answer? For example, 2 of your studied poems comply with the question, but 3 don't. No, Roisin, that would not be frowned upon. At all times you're engaging with the question. Now, it's unlikely that 3 don't. So what it is possible is that you could say, for example, with that question on Wordsworth, that yeah, some of his language, because Wordsworth is a 19th century romantic poet, some of his language is a bit arcane, like reading, for example, Hopkins. Some of his language is a little bit alien to our ear because it's from a different era, but that doesn't mean that his imagery isn't powerful or his symbolism isn't effective and his themes aren't relevant. Does that make sense? That's a nuanced response. These statements in the question, they're stimulus statements, Roisin. You know what stimulus is? It's something which is designed to, like a catalyst, it sets in motion your thinking. And as long as what you're saying is based in evidence and is relevant, then of course you can vary your response from poem to poem, and you can agree with the question in part or in whole. It's up to you. Yeah, but it depends on how well you deliver it. This paper 2 is discursive writing. Everything you do in paper 2 is language of argument. Everything you do is meant to be nuanced, informed response to statements. And discursive, and if you know about discursive writing, that's where it's different from persuasive writing or speech writing, because you're taking an umbrella view, a global view of the statement. So in a global view, you're looking at it from different perspectives. If you write an answer in which you say, yes, all of Kavanagh's poetry is really boring and this is irrelevant, and then you go on the next paragraph, however, in this poem, this is not relevant, well, then that's shit, and the way you've executed it is poor. But if you have a good think before you begin, and in your thesis, in your opening paragraph, you lay out your point of view, that, you know, there are, when you read that statement, you found it very interesting because you can see how that might be true in terms of certain poems, but you certainly don't think it's true in the case of all the poems, and you certainly don't think it's true uniformly in the poetry. That shows that you've had a good think, and then that lays the basis for your discussion in your essay. Okay? So have a look at this question. How would you cope with this one? Kavanagh effectively uses place, both literal and metaphorical, to explore elements of his personal and cultural identity. Now that was a really, really, okay, to Paul, it was a lovely question. It was a mock question, by the way, from 2023. And it was lovely, but with one little tricky part. So if you have, I'll just always think about that relationship between language and thematic concerns in a question. So you can see there, we have this reference to place. So think about Kavanagh. I remember reading that question going, do you know, I never thought about that. I've been teaching Kavanagh for a long time, and I just loved the question because you've got Inishkeen Road, you've got Raglan Road, you've got the Canal Bank in 2 poems, you've got the hospital in Rialto, the Rialto Bridge, you've got Shanko Duff, that's another place, you've got his family home in A Christmas Childhood. All of the poems have a narrative setting. They're all, as I said, scenarios. So I thought that was nice that reference, because it allowed you to connect all the poems. And then it talked about literal places. So those are literal places. But then they made that slightly more difficult. It said, and metaphorical. So what are the metaphorical places? So that raised the level of difficulty in the question. And then it said to explore elements of his personal identity. That would have been fine. But then it said, and cultural identity. And there's a little bit of your, Catholic Ireland, Kavanagh. So it was a lovely question. And if it had been Patrick Kavanagh effectively uses place to explore elements of his personal identity, it would have been a really, really, really easy question. But it was made a little bit trickier by the use of metaphorical and the use of cultural. That was the filter. The students who will get to H4 or the H3 will be able to deal with place, literal, and personal. The student is going to get maybe higher than that. Is going to be able to deal with the metaphorical and cultural element of the question. Just let me go to Eve's question here before I continue, because I'm going to come back to questions in the next hour, but I want to get to this question now in a second. Is there marks considered for evidence of outside knowledge in the poetry question? It's something we are encouraged to add in history essays. An example would be like including a quote from somebody commenting Kavanagh's work or life. Yeah. So again, it's interesting because I'm a history teacher as well, Eve. And history is, people always think English and history are the same. They're phenomenally different subjects to teach. I hesitate to say this, but I'm going to say it. Unfortunately, our Leaving Cert history course doesn't really encourage critical thinking. In other words, you can do great in Leaving Cert history, just go on and do loads of learning and learn essays. And if the certain essays, if you have them ready, the wording of the question might be slightly different, but you're going to be able to use 90% of your learned material. English isn't like that. English is all about critical thinking. So the way you're being judged in English, I mentioned this earlier on today. The marking scheme is PCLM, but I'm always talking about, and I apologize if you are one of my regular students for labouring this point, but I'm always asking when I'm reading your work, okay, is this relevant to the question, or is the student wandering off the point, telling me the story of the poem without in any way bringing it back to the question? Is it relevant? Because that's what the P in purpose means. Okay, have they done the heavy lifting, or are they spoofers? I read a mock paper recently by a student who was clearly very capable, and the student was given an artificially high grade by the mock examiner because the student didn't know their material, hadn't done the heavy lifting, didn't know their quotes, didn't know the material in specific detail. And as a Leaving Cert examiner, you're just going, go away. I'm not rewarding you. You've had 2 years to do this. Right? So if you haven't done the lifting, I'm not going to reward you. That's like somebody entering into a race and saying, give us a medal, even though I wasn't able to finish. No, if you haven't done the training, boo-hoo for you. So is the work relevant? Is the work informed? Is it written in language which is clear and easy to read and properly punctuated? Maybe with a degree of sophistication in the phrasing, but really the most important thing is clarity of expression. Look at all the marking schemes. That's what it says over and over and over again when it comes to language, clarity of expression. And then to go to Eve's question, is there contextualization? Now that Eve means, has the student demonstrated an ability to think about how the point they're making and the evidence they're providing is relevant to the question under discussion? And how informed is the student? How deep does their knowledge go? Now, that's where sometimes you come across an essay and the student is really into that poet. And they bring in like a quote by A.C. Grayling, or so there's often, you often find A.C. Grayling quotes. He was a very famous literary critic. And they bring it in, and it's just they integrate it and they make it work really well. Often maybe at the start of their essay they open with it, and you go, Christ, they've really done the work, and that's relevant. Now in that case, Eve, as long as you don't start ronding away from the question, that can add a real layer of sophistication to a response. It can really make you impressed, because to be honest with you, most of the answers are not good. Right? If I was honest, like I certainly don't correct leaving cert every year, and I would never claim to be someone who does that, because it's torture. But like the last time I corrected leaving cert, I got through the first 100 scripts, and I was chatting to my supervisor. Every examiner has a supervising examiner who just keeps things ticking over. And she looked at my stats, and I hadn't given one H1 in the first 100 scripts. And I hadn't given one H1 because there weren't any H1s. And there were only, I think, 4 H2s out of the first 100 scripts. And it was simply because that was the standard. That was the, there was some people work very hard, but their work wasn't, they weren't able to contextualize points. There wasn't relevant, the language. So whatever, there wasn't any H1s. And the examiner came back to me, the supervising examiner, and said, where there should be at least 2 H1s in that first 100. And I said, well, I'm not going to give people H1s who don't deserve them. And she came back to me and said, well, what you need to understand is there's going to be somewhere in there, there's 2 students whose work is better than the other 100 people. So have a look at those H2s again. And I did, and one of them I moved up to a H1, but the other one I didn't. But eventually when I got the 250 scripts corrected, I was on that 2% number. That's not artificial, but it's just, it's what you see come up. But I think that 2% number, this is what the point I'm trying to get to. I think that 2% number, are you ready for this, is too high. I don't think that 2% of candidates are writing at the level that they expect that deserves H1s, because I think a lot of candidates, their work is limited and they don't demonstrate enough engagement with the material. And to answer your question, Eve, sorry now if I'm going off on a rant here. To answer your question, if you can demonstrate real understanding of the work and you haven't just learned some quote from a critic that you think will sound good and slapped it down on the page and not shown why it's relevant to the question, if you are able to demonstrate real knowledge of the poet's work in a broad sense and make it fit with the question, then that can be very impressive. Now, rant over. Loads of work to do. What time is it? Right. So this is the question that was asked on Kavanagh in 2023 when he came up. Now remember, at the start of the class I said there's 3 Irish poets prescribed for study this year. There will be 5 poets examined. It will be shocking if at least 2 of those poets are not Irish. It's possible you might get 1 Irish one. Could you get Eliot and Hopkins this year? You could. And then maybe get 2 of the female poets and 1 of the Irish poets. You could. But I don't play that game. I teach all 8 poets, and I tell my students to pick 4 or 5 of those poets and prepare them. And if they don't want to do that, that's up to them. That's their choice. No problem, Eve. Sorry about the rant, by the way. So this was the question. And what I did was here, I just wrote this out because I wanted to show you different parts of this question. And students really struggled with this in 2023. Like really struggled with it. Weren't able to handle it at all. How successfully, and see that IYO there? That stands for in your opinion. So you are allowed to have an opinion. This goes back to, can you disagree with the question whole or in part? And I'm going to show you, not my response to that, but the chief examiner's response to it in a few minutes. But if it's your opinion, you're allowed to have an opinion. It just has to be based in evidence. So how successfully does Kavanagh employ, successfully could even be, sometimes they use the word effectively instead. How successfully, how effectively does Kavanagh employ both a lyrical style, so there's your style element, and a celebratory tone to elevate the mundane realism of his work? Now, is the poem that we read a lyrical, could you say that Inishkeen Road July Evening is written in a lyrical style? 100%, as my wife would say, absolutely 100%. She mocks me because I apparently say that a lot. It is the very definition of lyric poetry, that poem, Inishkeen Road July Evening. It is autobiographical, it is reflective, it is anecdotal, it is thoughtful, philosophical, it's honest, it's lyrical. Is it celebratory? No, it's not celebratory. Does it elevate the mundane realism of his work? Well, yeah, because mundane realism is everyday life. He's just depicting like a country barn dance, and he's depicting his own experience of isolation. But he brings in these insights, these reflective insights that lift the poem beyond that ordinary world in which he lives into something more profound. But there's not a celebratory tone. So in that particular question, you go, yeah, very lyrical. This poem, not celebratory, but does elevate the mundane realism. So Then you go to other poems later on that are lyrical and celebratory and also. So the statement doesn't have to fit with every poem is the point I'm trying to make. Yeah, I don't give marks for well, first of all, your teacher shouldn't be showing anybody past Leaving Cert scripts, right? Because I don't know where they're meant to be available. But what your teacher is saying is I when it comes to openings, Connell, my rule is very quickly, like the KISS rules, keep it short and simple. But I will say this about your opening. I don't know, has your teacher, Connell, ever mentioned, no, but this is meant to be about Patrick Kavanagh here, but the importance of, does that phrase mean anything to you? And this is where students who don't write an effective opening can really fall down. Does that phrase mean, oh, sorry, it's Elsa said that, was it? No, it was Connell. What's Elsa saying? Oh, no, Elsa, no. Don't worry about the examiner getting bored. It's boring as hell to mark the leaving cert. There's no, there's no way of getting around that. Try and look at it the other way around. If you're one of 10 people in 15 writing about Kavanagh and everybody else does a really bad job of it and you do a good job of it, how's the examiner going to feel about you? So pick the question that works for you. Don't worry about everybody else. You're only in control of you. You're in control of your um of your the way you write and your responses. And everything else is outside of your control. And anything outside of your control, forget about it. Yeah. So a thesis statement is, so you know when a barrister goes into court and she says, yeah, lyrical is related. No, that's Danny. That's one of the bugbears of my life. These are great questions. This class is going to go over time. Sorry, I'm enjoying myself now. I love talking about poetry. So Colin, right, and everybody on this call, the most important thing you're going to write in your essay on King Lear, on the Crucible, on comparative, on poetry, if you're doing a speech or a discursive essay, any of the opinion questions is your thesis statement. So when a barrister walks into court, the barrister, the jury's sitting there, and she turns around and she says to the members of the jury that their client is innocent. So then the jury know that everything that she's going to say for the rest of that case is going to be designed to prove the truth of that statement. In the same way, the prosecution barrister can come in and he can say, members of the jury, this dude is guilty. And then we know, okay, this is what his case is. That's a thesis statement. And it's crucial that you give a thoughtful and nuanced thesis statement in the opening of your essay. And once you do that, Connell has it nailed down there. And I like the way your response is short, Connell. Connell has written, yes, question facing and short. That's all the opening needs to be. You need to give a clear thesis. This is my response to that statement. Kavanagh's poetry is lyrical, often celebratory, but not always celebratory. And yes, his work does elevate the mundane realism of his work. Sorry, his style does elevate the mundane realism of his work. And then, boom, off you go and show that. So that's where openings matter, Connell. But you're right, people spend far too much time in their openings, spend far too much time worrying about them. For me, make a good impression, be on the question, move on. Yeah, lyrical. So you have lyric poetry. Lyric poetry is personal. It's about the poet's own life experiences. Sylvia Plath, lyric poet. Kavanagh, lyric poet. Boland, lyric poet. They write about their own life and experience. In fact, you can say that on the Leaving Cert course, the only poet who is not in some way a lyric poet is Eliot, because he doesn't really. Well, even his religious poems kind of are. But it's a phrase I don't like, and I don't like it in a question. It was just because it was on Kavanagh. Kavanagh's such an obviously lyrical poet, and yes, you can bring in the rhyming, the fluency, the meter, that can be part of it as well. Okay? If it's relevant to the question, Nat. No, I'm not. No. So, in terms of what the question about are there any marks going, C has said, am I right in saying there's no marks going for the opening closing paragraph? Remember, can I talk about Patrick Kavanagh tonight? Okay. Purpose is answer the question. C stands for coherence of delivery. And coherence of delivery essentially means Does your answer have a B, M, E, which is all connected? Beginning, middle, and end. You do need to write a brief introduction. You do need to write a brief conclusion in their full length essays. You do. You don't need to do it in the only two places where you don't need to write kind of a little introduction and conclusion is in your question A tasks. I'll deal with them on Monday. And in your unseen poetry task, I'll deal with them on Thursday. Everywhere else, a little introduction, a little conclusion. So you need to set your argument, then develop your argument, then conclude your argument. So yeah, if you don't write any opening and you don't write any conclusion, you will lose coherence marks. I have no idea. I'm going to get to celebratory tone now. So yes, okay, let's go to celebratory tone. So we've looked at one of the poems by we've looked at one of the poems by Kavanagh, which was from the kind of the early stage of his life when clearly he was unhappy. He felt like Alexander Selkirk. He felt isolated, from the half-thought code of mysteries and the wink and elbow language of the light. So what you then do is you go and you have a look at one of the canal sonnets. And my favourite canal sonnet is The Hospital. And this poem has a celebratory tone. Okay? So this is, and again, just to be clear, Eve, right? Sometimes teachers can be a little bit too quick to. So you might just what you have said just might not have made sense. Sometimes with English students they think they've made sense. One of the things I do increasingly in class now is I put the students' work up on the board on the iPad, and we peer review the work. Now, obviously, it's done by agreement, and anybody who doesn't want to have their work put up on the board for whatever reason, that doesn't happen. But it's unbelievable how many students want me to do that. And you put something up on the board, and I just read one paragraph that you've written, and you thought, yeah, I thought I did a very good job there. And then when I take it apart and I read it out loud, you can see that the point wasn't fully made, or what you thought you were saying wasn't quite what you managed to say, and it wasn't. It was more confused than you imagined it was when you wrote it. So that might be what your teacher's thinking about. But what your interpretation of celebratory tone is, as long as you're saying it clearly, like your teacher's, you've got 200 and something people correcting the Leaving Cert. They're all going to have a slightly different interpretation of what that might mean, but they're not allowed to punish you as long as you're dealing with it and you're explaining your points properly in an evidence-based way. Okay, here we go. I love this poem. Is this my favourite Kavanagh poem? No, it's not. My favourite Kavanagh poem is on the wall over there. It's called Advent, but it's too long to go through now. I love this poem. And this poem is a celebration of life. It is another sonnet. And it is literally a celebration of life because it was written during his rehab or recovery from cancer. In other words, it was written during a period of his life when he recovered from a point where he thought he was going to die. He had a brush with mortality. And that experience made him value life in a way that he hadn't valued it before, or in a way that he wished he could have before. That's what you see in the poem Advent, this desire to return to the, childlike state of innocence where, the world is somehow more magical. So you want to see a celebratory tone, Eve. A year ago, I fell in love with the functional ward of a chest hospital. It's a brilliant opening line. Again, a year ago, I fell in love with. No, it's not written in iambic pentameter. This is not one of those. But what you've got there is a gorgeous example of juxtaposition. So you get down as far as there, right? See? A year ago, I fell in love with. Now, there you go. That's lyrical. He's talking about his experiences of falling in love. He's being very honest. The language is very simple and easy to read. I don't know why I have this jacket on. I was outside earlier on, never took it off. I'm roasting now. But you don't expect that then to be followed by the functional ward of a chest hospital. You don't expect love which is this kind of romantic idea, to be put together with this kind of really mundane, banal, slightly ugly, unattractive place. And here he is elevating, we don't have to go into this in too much detail because this won't be the wording of this question this year, but this is what it means. Here he is elevating the mundane. He's taking a boring, unexciting, unromantic place, and he's giving it some meaning. He's elevating it through his celebratory tone. Now, why would you be in love with the functional ward of a chest hospital? Because that place kept you alive. Because had you not been able to see that place, it would be because you were dead. So what he's saying in this poem is that once you begin to appreciate being alive, there is beauty all around you in the world. And that's a celebratory, positive message that we get in his poetry. Remember the question about place, about the discussion, or how he uses setting or place to both real and metaphorical to explore personal and cultural aspects of his life. Here's an example of his ability to paint a picture using words and immerse us into a place. Square cubicles in a row, plain concrete, wash basins, and art lovers. Whoa! Not counting how the fellow in the next bed snored. So he's going into great detail describing this quite unattractive medical ward, where there's a guy next door snoring, where there are square, there's no even sensual round or curved shapes. Everything is square, everything is organized in a row, everything is plain concrete. There's nothing attractive. But then he says this, and for me, this is my Patrick Kavanagh quote that I use over and over and over again. But nothing whatever is by love debarred, the common and banal her heat can know. Now that is a declaration. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Eve. That's good. Yeah, and sometimes that's what happens. Maybe you've just picked the wrong poem, and you're trying to. Do you remember when I don't know if you have any young people in your life. I have 3 kids, and when they were small, and you know that game that you give to, like, not infants, but the kind of, they're at, well, maybe they are infants. The age where they're like a few months old or a little bit older than that, and it's like a box and it has holes cut in it, a square hole, a round hole, a triangular hole, a star, and then there's the shapes, and like the kid has to fit the square peg into the square hole and the round peg into the round. You know the game I'm talking about. Well, when you see the kid, when you see the kid who has the star shape, and they're just trying to ram it into the fucking circular hole, and it's not working. You look at that kid going, that kid's life's going to be hard. Sorry. But you do get that sometimes when you're reading students' work. They know something, and because they know it, they're determined to use it. But they're not actually thinking about whether it is the right thing to use in the context of the question. I hope that makes some sense. Now, I always say that if you saw the kid then kind of look at the star shape and go, this is a pain in the arse, and then whip out a penknife and carve off the edges and then fit it in, you go, lovely hurling, well done. You managed to use your skills and your tools to adapt your raw material to fit with the needs. And of course, that's part of the skill. And that's why when I'm asked a question like the one by Tom, would an examiner rather, if you made an unconventional view rather than the wide interpretation? Tom, again, that's again, you're trying to second guess. What do we want? We want work which is purposeful, coherent, written in language which is clear and mechanically accurate. And if you're interested, I get in trouble for saying this. I say this in classes all the time. One thing being an English teacher has really confirmed for me, and again, I'm sorry if I'm a very bold boy for saying this, is that the vast majority of people are really boring. They've nothing. Most people have nothing to say. They're kind of writing for the sake of writing. Oh, I've got 4 pages done. Is that 4 pages, Paul? Is that enough 4 pages? And I'm going, what? Well, no, is it interesting? And I've often read students, conventional. I don't even know what you mean by conventional, because poetry is open to interpretation. Relevant, informed, clear, and demonstrating the critical thinking ability to contextualize your points. If you do that, you're going to score well in the Leaving Cert. We'll talk about the structure of paragraph right now in a couple of minutes. It's already 6:05, 5:05. Okay. So can you see that there? So there we have him saying, like, he's celebrating. He's celebrating being alive. And he's saying nothing is excluded from love. You can love anything, even the most boring, common, or banal things, like the functional ward of a chest hospital. It's got to do with an attitude, he's saying. It's got to do with how you view the world. If you're viewing the world through a positive, celebratory, I'm alive and happy to be alive worldview, well, then there is beauty all around you. And that's why that question was asked. That's why the question was framed the way it was framed, because it was an open goal if you had your canal sonnets ready. And it was an open goal if you had, a couple of the early kind of lyrical poems, which aren't quite so celebratory. And then you have this brilliant example here. The corridor led to a stairway below, and the stairway below was, and below was the inexhaustible adventure of a gravelled yard. And I love that. Again, there's a really good example. I'm going to go to the mind map now in a second. There's a really good example of juxtaposition and hyperbole in this poet's work. And he often does use hyperbole in his poetry. Hyperbole, of course, deliberate exaggeration. His work is deeply philosophical. Tell me the name of a poet whose work is not philosophical. I think all of the poets' work is. What's philosophy? It's thinking about life and the meaning of life, and not necessarily coming up with answers, but just kind of thinking about it. And I don't think there's a poet who you couldn't use the word philosophical for. Maybe Platt, but even I think her work is very thoughtful. Yeah. So, you get a gravelled yard, so some little, yard with stones in it. And he talks about the inexhaustible adventure of a gravelled yard. And of course, what he's talking about is when you're really, really ill and you have your problems with your lungs and you find it hard to move around, to get down the stairs to that yard is like a massive achievement. So that's a thing to celebrate. And he celebrates it through the hyperbole there. Yeah, yeah. It's. I don't know if it's even the love of wisdom. It's the love of philosophy for me is just being interested in the world, taking the blinkers off, asking questions. Yes, of course you can. Yeah, of course you can. We'll talk about that not today. We'll do another class on. I've done millions of classes this year on poetry essay writing. I just wish you were all on them. Anyway, look, this is what love does to things. Again, another great quote from Kavanagh. A great quote from Kavanagh. Look how happy he is. Look how content he is. Look how love has transformed the way he looks at the world. He describes the Rialto Bridge. There's a place. The main gate that was bent by a heavy lorry. The seat at the back of a shed that was a sun trap. Look at the gorgeous use of sibilance in that line. Look at the use of light imagery, the warmth of the sun on your skin, just being alive. Naming these things. Look at the neologism, the compound word is the love act, and it's pledged. By the way, the pledge is I love you. He loves being alive. And then he says his job, his raison, will I be really English teacher, pretentious, punch yourself in the face? His raison d'etre. It's like that. I love the French language. I don't like using it because I don't think it sounds well coming from a man with my accent. Raison d'etre means reason to be. Your reason to exist. And what Kavanagh says at the end of this poem is, for however many days, weeks, years, months he has left alive, he's going to make it his job to write poetry that has no bullshit about it and which celebrates life. And that's what he means when he says he's going to record love's mystery. He's going to record the beauty of life without thinking about it too much, in language which is accessible. That's what claptrap means. He's using a colloquial phrase there. And he's going to, because he's aware of the fact that life is transitory, that life is temporary, that we are all mortal, and that it doesn't last. And because he's now aware of that, because he's had his brush with illness and his brush with death, he is determined to celebrate being alive as much as he possibly can. And that's the very definition of lyric poetry. It's the very definition of a celebratory tone. And he's taken this most mundane place, you know, a chest hospital in Rialto, where he was recovering from surgery, and he's elevating it into something way beyond the ordinary. What quotes would I learn from this poem? I think I've got three quotes marked there, don't I? Yeah. So a year ago, I fell in love with the functional word of a chest hospital. It's just one of the great lines. Nothing whatever is by Love the Bard is if I'm not a man for a tattoo. I really am not a man for a tattoo. But if I was to have a line that of poetry that my favorite line from Kavanagh is on the wall over here. My little office I have bits and pieces of poems and things on the wall and pictures. My favorite line from Kavanagh is I just want to make sure I have it right here. The newness that was in every stale thing when we looked on it as children. The spirit-shocking wonder of a black slanting Ulster hill. And that, again, captures his idea that the world is fresh and beautiful if we look at it with an innocent or an optimistic eye. And when he says nothing whatever is by Love the Bard, I wish I could see the world like that more often, and I try to. And then, of course, this is what love does to things. And I'm going to tell you this, right? When he says this is what love does to things, that's about, the bard means, if you're barred from a pub, you're not let in. So in other words, you can see love or feel love from everything. In other words, everything has, it's kind of like Hopkins, that Inscape thing. It's like there's beauty everywhere. So nothing whatever is by Love the Bard. And banal means ordinary and boring. So the banal is your everyday, like waking up, going to school, having to, maybe go to work, and life is boring, and attending English class, right? That's what banal means. But like sometimes you can be in, English class in school, and your teacher can say something really interesting, or your mate can look at you in a funny way, or can, be falling asleep and you laugh and you just feel alive. So what he's saying is that, we're always, Kavanagh's big thing is that we're always looking over there for what we don't have, and not appreciating what's here and what we do have. That's what Shanko Duff is about. That's what Canal Bank Walk, Lines Written, even Advent is about. Those poems are about that idea that there is beauty all around us. I hope I'm not making a mess of this class. Are we going okay here? We're getting a sense of Kavanagh and the ideas. So I wanted to look at two poems by him, which are so similar. They're both sonnets. They're both lyric poetry. They're both deeply honest. They're both personal. They're both reflective. They're both inventive and creative and all those things. But one of them, he's like a deeply unhappy person, and he's looking to change his life because he's lonely and isolated, and he's like Alexander Selkirk. One of them, he's found happiness. And I think that's important when you're preparing Kavanagh, that you have a couple of poems from those two parts of his oeuvre from his collection of poetry. So, as I said, there's loads of stuff on Kavanagh on the YouTube channel if you're not a full-time member of Grind 360. So why don't you join for the last couple of months? And if you are a member, you can see that I've broken down the poems in great detail on the platform, so you can have a look at them. What I want to do now